Hello everyone, I'm Alan, also known as McLaren 2009, and today I'm playing Derail Valley. I'm doing a couple of quick freight hauling missions going between the harbor town and the machine factory in town. Right now, I have 3 separate sets of cars. Well, I have 2 at the moment. I'm hooking up the third one. I have military cargo, probably like small arms, ammunition, uniform, stuff like that. Intermodal containers filled with acetylene. And this set up here is electronics and tools. All of them are going to the machine factory in town. Haven't been there for a little while. Honestly, I'm attempting to see if I can get enough money to get the last license in the game. I'm about $80,000 away from getting the Military 3 license, allowing me to carry nuclear fuel and other, really dangerous stuff. So I'm trying to see if I can do enough jobs to get that final license, because I have a feeling that when the simulation update comes out later this year, it sounds like there's going to be more locomotives, more cargo types, maybe even more industries. So I kind of want to get ready for that. And then I've also been on a kick lately where I've been playing a lot of railroad-based simulators, because in real life I am working on becoming an actual train conductor. So I've been playing more of these games to kind of get a feel for what that job actually looks like. In the past, my only experience with the railroad was I worked as a welder in a factory building train cars. Now, the things I mostly built were all coal hoppers, a couple of log cars, a couple of general purpose hoppers and gondolas, stuff like that. So I've never actually worked on these types of cars or even locomotives, but I know a little bit about them. And outside of working for the railroad, potentially, I am also a truck driver. So I've carried heavy cargo. I have an endorsement to handle hazardous materials in real life. And basically, I've always had an interest in things that do crazy heavy jobs. It's a little bit different looking at these because I'm used to the ones we have here in the US that have the interlocking knuckles, whereas these have a chain and hook. It works, but arguably it's a little bit easier to use the knuckles because you can couple when moving. In fact, you kind of have to move in order to lock the pin in place. Whereas these, you actually have to stop, get, or attach the hook, and tighten it down. Now this right here is a little bit strange because this is the one thing that I cannot explain. When I connected these locomotives, I used the chain from the lead locomotive to connect to the trailing locomotive, yet now the trailing locomotive is connected to the lead locomotive, which is really bizarre. I've had the license to use the multiple unit cable for a while now, but I've only recently started using it. And luckily in this game, it's pretty straightforward into how you actually use it. It's pretty straightforward in the sense that all you have to do is just connect the locomotives, and then whatever one you touch the controls for next becomes the controlling locomotive, which is kind of weird in and of itself, but it's whatever. Alright, let's set out my map. Let's put this away. And let's get started. Now, in addition to playing Derail Valley, I've also been playing Train Sim World, because oddly enough, it actually has the real route that I would be working on. So to me, it was pretty cool to be able to actually see the equipment and the area that I would be working, or that I'd be working in. And then it's also cool because you get to see real equipment, whereas this isn't exactly real, but it's inspired by things that are. Now, the difference, even with just this simple multiple unit setup, on the real ones there would be like switches you have to flip so that you can designate which locomotive is controlling. But here it's just as simple as plug them in, make sure the controls are neutral, and then just use the controls in one of them, and it seems to automatically affect the controls in the other one. I would imagine it would cause problems if I left this one set and then went back and started messing with that one. So I'm not going to do that. But we're going to get started on this rather long trip. And hopefully we can get enough money from this to get pretty close to the next license. Now, what's going to start causing problems is I have the tracks currently aligned to go towards the goods factory, so when we get close to the steel mill, we're going to have to switch off. And then I can't remember if the tracks are aligned to go to the machine factory or if they're going into the city southwest. If that's the case, I'm going to have to stop somewhere along this trip. I'm going to have to stop just outside of the city to make sure that everything's good. Alright, now, this part up here is mostly uphill, right up until about this Y intersection right here. Then it'll start going downhill. But you gotta have a little bit of speed for this section because this part's a little steep. Now, I don't currently have enough cargo to fully warrant using 2 locomotives, but I will say that it does make it significantly easier. Like, you don't have to have the throttle set as high, so you don't use as much fuel. Now, on this hill, it's mostly 40 kilometers an hour, so what I want to try to do is keep it around 35. So I'll set the throttle just high enough that the needle's going up, and then when I reach what I consider my safe speed, I'll reduce the throttle back down until it starts falling again. Now, being as I am not actually a licensed train engineer, I might become one day, but that's another thing entirely. I don't actually have any formal training with doing this. My only experience is between this and Train Sim World, and they both have tutorials that tell you how to work the controls, but they don't really tell you how to play. So it gets a little bit weird. Like, I know this is the throttle, this is the reverser, this is the automatic brake that will stop the entire train, this is the independent brake that'll just stop the locomotive. Like, I know what the controls in the cab do, but the problem is you don't know when to use them or how to use them. Like, for instance, with this game, I had the bad habit of I would predominantly use the independent brake as long as I can, even though I know the independent brake doesn't do much, it doesn't have much power to stop the entire train. It certainly can, but that's not a good use for it. But I was using the independent brake heavily because if I use the train brake, even if I apply just a little bit of pressure, the pressure has to build back up in order to fully release the brake. So I would only use the train brake if I absolutely had to, because I couldn't immediately start moving again after I released the brake. But now, playing through a little bit of Train Sim World, I've started to realize that you use the train brake first, but you only apply it in short bursts because it affects all the brakes on all of the cars. So you just crack it open if you want to slow down. And then you really just use the independent brake when you fully applied the train brake, but you want to hold the train in place while your air pressure builds back up. It's interesting because I mentioned earlier that I'm a licensed truck driver, and the brakes in a truck are similar to the brakes on a train, except the train doesn't actually have spring brakes. So in that regard, it's kind of the opposite. Like the way that the emergency brake on a tractor trailer works is you press in the red valve to supply air to your trailer. It gets up to 120 psi, compresses the spring in the spring brake chambers, and it releases the brake. Then there's also a service brake where you press the pedal on the floor and it pushes air into the other side of the brake chamber and activates the service brake. Whereas in this, you have air generated here in the locomotive, actually in both locomotives. It's like you have air in both locomotives going sent, and you have constant pressure being sent along the entire line all the way to the back of the train. And each car has a cylinder on it that stores air. And then when you apply the brake, it reduces the air in the system, and then the cars detect a change in pressure, and they apply the brakes. And then the brakes get released when the pressure gets back to its normal operating pressure. So, the same concept, but it works a different way. But you don't really learn how to do this unless you're actually an engineer. So you kind of learn how to play the game through trial and error, because I'm not a licensed engineer, so I kind of just had to figure this stuff out. You find out how the speed limits work. Like, that's another thing that has taken some time to figure out. Even though it should be fairly obvious, like that sign says I can go 60 kilometers an hour. But just passing that sign doesn't mean I can go 60 kilometers an hour. Because I'm finding out that just because the locomotive is in a faster speed zone, the rest of the train is not. So just because I can now go 60 kilometers an hour, it doesn't matter, because hypothetically the rest of the train is still back there in a 40k zone. So if you start going 60 back there, you're going to derail. And you don't want to do that. That was weird. Alright, and I'm currently... I'm getting to the part where we're about to start going downhill. So, I actually want to kill the throttle. The dynamic brake is supposedly coming with the simulator update, so that's another thing that I'm looking forward to, because through, like, Train Sim World, I finally know how to use that. But I think part of why the dynamic brake isn't implemented is because it seems like this is not a diesel-electric locomotive. Like, I don't think it has electric motors like it's supposed to. I think the actual diesel engine is directly controlling, or is directly propelling the locomotive. That's why we use so much diesel fuel. That's why when you first start this up and you turn on the circuit breakers and you go back to the engine room and you pull the lever to prime the engine, if you have the reverser into any position but neutral, when you pull that lever, you actually move the locomotive. Whereas it's supposed to be diesel-electric, where all of the propulsion is done by traction motors mounted on the axles. And then the diesel engine is just set to run automatically so that it recharges the batteries and gives it enough power to propel the train. And then the dynamic brake is connected to those traction motors, either like varying the voltage, varying the resistance. It changes it so that it's moving at two different speeds, and it makes it so that the motor itself is working, or the motor is working against itself to slow down the locomotive and by relation the train. And then you convert that resistance into heat. And then there would be massive heat sinks up there underneath a couple of those gigantic fans, which allow you to convert that electrical energy into heat, and then you cool the heat, and then you don't wear out the actual brake shoes. But as I said, I have no formal training with this, so probably not everything I say is completely accurate. That's just the best working understanding of it I have without going to engine school to learn how to do this properly. And that's kind of the problem that I have with these games. If you like, it's entirely possible to like simulators without actually doing that job. Like, you play the game to do something you probably wouldn't do in real life. Like, for instance, I used to really love playing the Microsoft Flight Simulator. I found out later in life I didn't have the vision to be a pilot, but I really liked playing the game. It was pretty cool that it had like a 1-to-1 scale model of the entire world, and you could practice flying airliners. I liked flying the Learjet between the airport that's near where I live and another airport that's about a 30-minute flight away, and I could just practice taking off at one place, landing at the other place. I'm never going to be an airline pilot. Well, I probably shouldn't say never, because I have made some very bizarre career changes, but it's not likely that I'll become an airline pilot. So I just play the simulator because it's fun. It's kind of a warped definition of fun, but that's another thing entirely. So I play like Derail Valley because this was quite literally my favorite VR game, and it was one of the first things that I got when I got my Oculus Rift. And it's awesome because I am, for all intents and purposes, actually standing inside of a locomotive, flipping switches, moving levers, and that is really, really cool, because at the time I didn't think I was ever going to actually set foot in a locomotive. I wasn't going to work for the railroad. Well, until very recently, when I actually started applying to the railroad. Alright, let's get that out. It's like since I actually started applying to work for the railroad. So stuff like this, I didn't think I was going to actually do any of this in real life. This was just a really immersive simulator that I really liked because I used to work on train cars, and part of that was building and replacing the coupling system. And then if you work with the guys on the trackmobile that are actually moving the cars from one building to another, you quickly start to get more familiar with all of that stuff. But I didn't think I was going to... I didn't think I'd be actually doing it. So you get into the game, and then you think that you complete the tutorial, and it's like, okay, cool. Now I actually know how to do this. Or I'm actually going to learn how to play the game, how to do the job. Or at least how to do the job in the game. And that's just not the case. Like, you do the tutorials, and you learn how all of that stuff works. Wow, no wonder I had so much trouble getting up that. That is a steep hill. Like, you learn how to work the controls. You learn what each lever does, but you don't actually learn how to use it, if that makes sense. Alright, let's set the independent brake real quick. Even though I guess realistically it wouldn't matter in the slightest since I'm going downhill. But yeah, it tells you how to set the throttle so that you get moving. It's like release the brakes, set the reverser, set the throttle, and just like that, you're moving. And then it tells you that if you want to save fuel, kill the throttle and just idle when you're going downhill. And then, alright, you now know everything you need to know. Good luck and Godspeed. It's like, you now know everything you need to know. Good luck and Godspeed. Well, there's a couple more things you might want to know. Like, when do you use the brakes? How do you use the brakes? How does it work? Why does it work? You learn all of those things if you actually do this for a living, but if you're just playing a game because you don't think you're going to find yourself in a position where you would be doing this for a living, then I guess you're on your own? It's just hard to say, I guess. And right now, we're not doing bad on fuel. Or time, but that's another thing entirely. Not getting any of the time bonuses, but I pretty much never do. Even though the game's called Derail Valley, I would prefer not to derail if I have a choice. Okay, at least I aligned all the switches to stay on the main line. That would get interesting. See, I've built cars like those, except the ones I worked on were triple hoppers. That was my first time properly working on stainless steel. Quad hoppers are a similar concept, but still different. Alright, let's get sped up a little bit. Coming up on Oil Well Central. Now the good news is the machine factory in town has diesel service, so I'll be able to get both of my locomotives here refueled. Because that's going to be the big thing that's holding me back on getting the last license. Because at the moment, I have $320,000. I need $400,000. And I estimate it's probably going to be somewhere around $18,000 to refuel both of these. Let's slow down a little bit. It would be kind of cool if this game had like an economy, sort of, where at least in some extent the industries were kind of connected. Like, if the... What the fuck? Okay. If it was connected in the sense that there were, like, the loads are persistent to an extent, so that you have, like, so many of this going to this location, so many of this going to that location, and then there are just interconnected things going between places. I don't know if something like that is coming with the simulator update. It's been kind of hard to keep up with the update posts in addition to everything else going on in life. But something like that would be pretty cool. Okay, this one we're going right. Coming up on this. Oh, that's not good. And I'm probably going to derail. Don't do that. This is probably why you have to be tested and qualify on a route before you become an engineer or a conductor. So you're not just running along and then suddenly, oh wait, we're going twice the legal speed limit. we're gonna die. That would generally be considered a bad day. What the hell was that? That's concerning. Okay. Okay. My locomotives became separated. And then it certainly doesn't do me any favors that my train is rather lengthy, so I gotta check a lot of cars. Alright, at least we're down into the last section. Okay. I need my remote. Turn that back on. Considering it's not currently connected to anything. I don't know what happened here. We're still on the rails. I think. Yeah, not a clue. Brakes aren't set. We're accelerating slowly. Yeah, I have no idea how that happened. Or I can't even definitively say what happened. But the locomotives just randomly became separated, and here we are. Had the emergency stop where I went from 55 to less than 30, so I didn't derail, and then when I started moving again, my locomotives decided they didn't want to be together anymore. My multiple units wanted a divorce. Happens to the best of us. Alright, so in this area, I might want to treat it just like we do in those mountains down there, and keep it around about 40. Just to play it safe. don't think I've ever gone to the sawmill, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. Alright. And we're moving again. I always loved I love the idea of a VR simulator game. Anything that you actually have to touch the controls is just awesome to me. Like, VR is like the perfect thing for simulators. Alright, we're going right here. Although realistically, if I was making a delivery to the city southwest... Damn it. If I were going to the city southwest, I would want to go down there and then back in, because there's not really anywhere to turn around. Yeah, this is the right way. Yeah, there's not really anywhere to turn around in there. So you want to go down there and then back up. Which, this remote is a lifesaver. You absolutely want to have this. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. Not like the game's not playable, just that luckily this specific case, it's not that bad, but sometimes like, say you're going to City Southwest, and you're doing like I said, and you're pulling all the way forward, and then backing in. Well, you have to make sure all of your switches are aligned, but you have to pull forward until you're past this switch. Like, you gotta pull forward until you're past this switch. And with, I don't know, 20, 30 cars, you're gonna have to pull forward what you think is far enough to actually do it. And then you get out and find out if you did, in fact, go far enough. And you probably didn't. So you run back, check to see if you cleared the switch. If you haven't, you gotta run all the way back and pull forward again. And then obviously if you have more time and experience, you'll get a little bit better at it, and you'll start being able to judge like car distances. And you'll actually have a better idea of if you've gone far enough. But starting out, I was not that good at judging distances, so I had to get out and look a lot of times. And that was before I became a truck driver and learned what that acronym even was. So, yeah, just doing like simple shunting jobs, it was painful until I got that remote. Then I could just stand at the switch and just remotely control the locomotive, have it go forward, backwards. Okay, now I'm clear the switch it in reverse, and go on with my day. Now, I don't want to accelerate too much because this is a rather long train, and I don't know if we're completely clear of that 30 kilometer an hour zone. Although I guess realistically that is kind of like part of the fun of the game, where you kind of have to figure it out. So I guess, like everything else in life, my feelings on it are complicated. On one hand, I don't like it because you kind of have to figure things out. And it would be nice if they at least gave you even like a little one of the manuals that says, hey, if you want to speed up, here's how you do it. Hey, if you want to slow down, here's a good way to do it. Stuff like that. Whereas you kind of learn, as the name almost implies, you kind of learn it the hard way. It's like, oh, I came into a corner way too hot and derailed the entire train. Alright, how do I not do that? Okay, so that's the speed limit. Alright, so if I stay under that, I shouldn't derail. And then you start to figure out, oh wait, that's the speed limit where I am currently, but my train is a mile long, so not all of me is in that speed limit zone. The previous one was lower, so you kind of have to remember where are the speed zones. And then it explains why in real life you have to spend so much time on signals and speeds. And it's just like, oh, that's why. So by trial and error, you're kind of learning how the real job works and why it works that way. It's like you learn by doing. And you see firsthand that, oh, I did something wrong, and a lot of things blew up. It's just, to an extent, I don't necessarily like the learn by breaking things method. I'd prefer to have some prior knowledge that says this is how you don't break things. Although realistically it's been so long since I looked at the manuals and did the tutorial for the game that maybe it does explain that the train brake takes time to build pressure back up after it's released. So use it responsibly. Try to plan when you're going to stop. Like, I distinctly remember when they implemented the speed limit signs and the grade signs. And they have graphics in one of the books that tell you what the signs mean. Like, for instance, those, whatever's on the sign, multiply it by 10, and that's the current speed limit. Alright, that's fine. But you'll notice that the previous one said 90, and that one says 60. Well, you weren't in the 90 zone for long, and then you immediately went down to the 60 zone. And then this right here, we're still in 60, but since we're going up a 1% grade, actually I kind of want to slow down anyway, because now we're getting to the point where we're actually at the final destination. Alright. Let's fully apply the independent. Release the train brake. And now, let's get the remote out. And let's get started. Alright. Schematic. Okay. Coming from the south. This is aligned for C. Yeah, that's aligned for C. Alright. C3. C4. Alright, now the electronics and all of that are in the very back of the train, and then the acetylene is in the middle. So we're going to have to go through 4. Alright, 1, 2... Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright. And I guess realistically I should have brought my caboose. So my signal would have been stronger. But it's such a pain to get it attached. Or at least it's a pain to get it attached to the back. And then the problem that I'm gonna encounter, or that I'm currently encountering, is the fact that it's uphill. So I literally stopped on a hill. So my trains are getting one hell of a workout. Or my locomotives are pushing to get this absurd load up that little 1% grade. This is 300 tons. This is 234 tons. Okay, let's turn that down a little bit, because once you actually get in the yard, it kind of flattens out. Alright, so we uncouple that in 4, and then we're going to back this into 3, And then we gotta go even farther out, because past the switch, or past the entrance, is where you get to the track to back into the military yard. So we can drop off the last 3. And this video is going to be over an hour long. Alright. Let's get over here. Now, luckily, it's actually really easy to figure out which ones are which. I didn't initially plan that every car would have intermodal containers on it, but the military ones are green, the acetylene ones are orange, and then when I actually get to the very back, the electronics and tools containers are a different shade, or the first one is a different shade of orange. And not to mention, all of these are double containers, whereas this, not only is it a different color, they're all only single containers. And now, when that last car passes this sign, I can hit the train brake, and we dump those cars off right here on the inbound track. We're going to need a little more speed. Don't want to slow down yet. A lot of parts of this game are kind of like difficult to adapt to. Like, for instance, I live in the US, so I'm used to imperial measurements, which isn't necessarily a problem. Like, I'm used to the general rule of thumb that for coupling cars, you want to stay around about 5 miles per hour. Pretty straightforward. And in here, I've kept with like 5 as a good number, but realistically, of course it's on the other side. That's 5 kilometers an hour, which it's still a good number, because 5 kilometers an hour, you're not going to break the cars. And you don't damage anything that way. But they're not the same. 5 kilometers an hour, that's more like 3.2 miles per hour. So it's still comparable. It's just a little bit different. It's a good rule of thumb, but it's lower than it has to be. Like, I could probably go as high as, like, 7 or 8, and it would be fine. But I don't do that. And then obviously I'm used to, when I say speed limits, I'm used to miles an hour. And then when I look at the speed limit signs, it's in kilometers per hour. Now, it's not that hard of a transition, because I went on vacation. I went out to Romania, and I had a rental car when I was out there. So I was briefly exposed to, metric. So I know that, like, 50 kilometers an hour is around about 35. So that's a pretty common speed limit for main, like, populated city streets, stuff like that. But as with everything else, it's just not what I'm, like, used to. Now, there are things like mods for the game, but I've never been one for learning how to actually mod. Like, I could get mods for the coupler knuckles. You can convert the speed limits to Imperial. You can do all of those things, but I never really had the dedication to learn how to do it, so I always preferred to just leave the game as it comes and just kind of adapt to how the game was already made, and that suits me just fine. Yeah, like, all of the things that I've got, like, trivial problems with aren't really problems, and they're easily addressed and corrected. But I'm just not dedicated enough to do it. What was it doing that thing again? This is another thing that's been a little bit weird lately. You have to, like, really rev the engine, because sometimes there are, like, a couple of parts on the track where it's like there are parts on the track where it just gets, like, hung up. Yeah, and it just, like, gets stuck. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it just does. And then you gotta, like, push the throttle as far as it'll go. Just to get it unstuck. 74 minutes. 73 minutes. Yeah, the military one's going to be even worse. Because I actually did a shunting job prior to getting hooked up to this one. Okay. Now how do I get there? Yeah, this one's gonna be even worse. Okay. Alright, now that runs across into the... Yeah, okay. So that's already set to go that way. And... I need to get this aligned to be coming from that direction. Where is my train? Questions you don't want to ask. It is really cool, like if you use the operation, if you think of like the operations in this game kind of like a puzzle. Like, okay, I'm on this track, I need to get to that track. How can I go about doing it? It makes the game a lot more interesting, in my opinion. Even something as simple as, where is the front of the train? Where are my locomotives? How can I orient myself in such a way that I'm backing into the storage track and pulling forward onto the main line. So you just have to go through this slight thought process of how do I actually do it? How do I actually do the thing that I want to do? And I know that is a slight downhill or downward grade. So I wanted to set the independent brake to make sure that I don't roll forward, and then hit the throttle as I release, or just before I release the brake, so that we don't have to overcome momentum trying to go downhill. And I need to get this out. E3I. Okay. Train is moving. Helps if you're paying attention and know what you're doing. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Alright. So we need to go down this track. Alright. Alright, that was probably too long with the independent, or with the train brake. Oh, and I missed that switch. So yeah, this has been definitely one of my favorite VR games, because it doesn't really make you sick. Like, motion sickness isn't really all that bad with this one. It's pretty easy to pick it up and play, it's definitely one of the better games that would be a good first introduction to virtual reality. It certainly was for me. Yeah, there's kinda some trial and error with learning how to actually play, but it's fine. You can figure this stuff out pretty easily. And you don't really have to break too many things in order to actually understand how it works. Or at least understand well enough how to use it. See what I mean? From the beginning, I've been connecting from the front to the back. Yet somehow it's ignoring me and deciding, nah, we're gonna do it from the back to the front. Maybe the game has like a preference, like it would do one way over the other. All right, $23,000, and this took 100 minutes, so it took more than twice the time it was supposed to take. Yeah, what can you do? Alright, well, in any regard, this has been Derail Valley. It's been a much longer video than I've made for a long time. But thank you all for watching, and have a nice day.